Okay, welcome. So in this relatively short clip, I'm going to be talking about primary sources, how historians look at a primary source, and how historians are able to extract information from primary sources. Um, you should have by now already read the primary source definitions that are available in this module. Primary sources, just in a nutshell, right? Make sure you look at that. But basically, they're sources that are created by someone with knowledge of an event at or around the time that an event happens. Something like this, right? So before we get into sort of breaking down the primary source, we should, of course, just read it, right? So here we have this: to be sold on board the ship Bunce Island on Tuesday, the 6th of May next, at Ashley Ferry, a choice cargo of about 250 fine, healthy Negroes. Just arrived from the Windward and Rice Coast. The utmost care has already been taken and shall be continued to keep them free from the least danger of being infected with the smallpox, no boat having been on board, and all other communication with people from Charlestown prevented. Austin, Lawrence, and Appleby. And then they go on to say how half of these people have had the smallpox in their own country. So, what do we get out of this? Well, immediately we know this, of course, is an ad for the sale of human cargo. So they had ads for these things. Let me tell you, one of the best ways one of the best ways to understand how a community thinks about something in a particular place and time is by looking at advertisements of that community's, uh, you know, of that community during a particular place and time that you're looking to understand. Advertisements will tell you a lot because remember, advertisements are really generated in order to appeal to as many people as possible, right? So this obviously was an advertisement that would have bothered pretty much nobody at this time. Of course, if you see this today, you know, in your local newspaper or Craigslist or something, you're going to be like, okay, what the heck is this? So times have changed, right? So the point is, these were no big thing. These were expected. These were everywhere. The sale of human cargo. And when we start to look at this, we realize a couple of things that they didn't really, I mean, you've seen this before, right? They didn't quite write the way we do today. First of all, the letter F as in football, that kind of looks like the letter S as in Samantha, right? So the F or the S, I don't know. Also, Tuesday has got that weird S in it, but it's also not capitalized. Is it because they didn't capitalize, or was this a mistake or something? It's hard to say, but I will tell you that it's probably not a mistake. They didn't really care too much about capitalization back in the day. And that's more of a late 19th century thing. Capitalization, punctuation, and so forth. So let's kind of move into this a little bit. You know, when I looked at this, and by the way, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this. I was looking for this kind of ad, the sale of people, and I wanted to show you guys how to kind of break it down and sort of glean some information from it. So I've only spent a little bit of time on this, actually. You may see more things than I do, but what I started to do off the top of the bat is okay, there's a ship apparently called the Bunce Island, a ship. And I did some searches, and of course, you got to be careful with what's online. I know what's reputable. You have a good feeling also of what's reputable, I'm sure. But it's easy to get sucked into looking and relying on sources that really aren't really credible. So we have to be careful of that. But I can assure you that I looked at sources that were really credible. You know, I'm looking at government sources. I'm looking at Yale sources, .edu sources. And what I've discovered, now I wasn't able to find a ship called the Bunce Island. It could be that that's a typo. I'm not sure. But here's what I did find. And I kind of abandoned the search for Bunce Island when I found out that, in fact, there is such a thing as Bunce Island, Bunce, rather than Bance. Turns out Bunce Island is an actual island. It's off the coast of West Africa. And at the time of the slave trade, It was a trading post. It was a place where a lot of Africans were shipped through. Lots of slaves went through there. I also discovered that the owner of this island did a lot of business with a man named Henry Lawrence. And of course, I remembered at the bottom here, Austin, Lawrence, and Appleby. So I thought, there's got to be a connection there. There is a connection there. And so just by sort of making connections between Bunce Island and searching and seeing what that is, and then coming across the name Henry Lawrence, and then coming back to it, because it actually sends me back to this, because Austin Lawrence and Appleby is set out right there very nicely. Apparently the name of some sort of corporation or limited liability company, something like that, right? It turns out that Henry Lawrence is one of the richest planters in Georgia at this time in what appears to be the 1800, right around 1800. Now, here's the thing. Now, he's one of the richest planters in Georgia, but he also deals in slaves. So I've gotten this far with it, but I've also thought, you know what? Where are they going? What is Ashley Ferry? They're going to be sold in Ashley Ferry. Okay. Now I look and I see Ashley Ferry, and then I see the word, Charlestown, and it turns out, just doing some searches, that Ashley Ferry is a place right outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So we're not talking Georgia here. We're talking South Carolina, I think. Well, okay, Charlestown, we see it there toward the bottom, but we don't see Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina is spelled Charles and then T-O-N. But here we see Charlestown. But there's a connection here, as I said. In fact, Ashley Ferry is a place right outside of Charleston, South Carolina today. So I am convinced that this, of course, is in South Carolina, not Georgia. So it seems to me that the Austin, Lawrence, and Appleby company or corporation, whatever it is, are the slave traders, right? And Lawrence, even though he owns plantations in Georgia, was also involved in the slave trade. So that supports that other thing that I said a moment ago that I found, right? That he was a planter. So the other thing is, quite frankly, and this one's simple, right? But the name Charleston must have changed at some point. So the question becomes when and why. I don't know. But this is how historians do this. They will look at this and think, okay, maybe there's a way to find out when and why. Why would it change? This might not interest you, but it does interest a lot of people, especially linguists and so forth, and cultural historians. Why change the name, right? I mean, think about name changes today, which can be quite problematic for a lot of people when people want to change the name of something that they don't like, right? So name changes can be problematic. So why would they have changed that? That's my question. To get to a couple more interesting points, what do we know about the people that were considered human cargo? What have been their experiences so far? We know that they're going to be sold at Ashley Ferry. But where do they come from? Look at where they come from. It looks like the Windward and Rice Coast. Now, if you do a little bit of research on that, you'll find that the Windward and Rice Coasts were really, it just means the coast of West Africa, but particularly rice growing regions. Okay, so this is where they're from. That's where they're from. What language do they speak? Well, it's hard to say, but I can probably guess what language they don't speak based on where we know they've been. So if you look at where they've been, where they came from, and where they're going to be sold, there's not a whole lot in between. So what language don't they speak, most likely, even though they're landing here? What are these people seasoned, as we understand the term? I think you can answer these questions yourself. Are they healthy? Well, that one's a little bit obvious, right? I mean, I think it is. They say they're healthy, but are ads always truthful? This is an ad for sale. I mean, if you ever bought anything on Craigslist, you have to be careful, right? So we're not so sure if they're healthy. We think they are, but who knows? You also, but what this does tell us about the fact that they make such a big deal about their health is that people are in constant fear of disease at this time. Diseases run rampant, especially smallpox. So you should know, of course, that what we should know, of course, is that Africans, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, you should know Africans are not immune to smallpox, right? You can just tell from this advertisement because they're telling you, don't worry, they don't have it. And in fact, they go on to tell you that half of them had already had smallpox back home, presumably cured by now. It's possible also that they were given some sort of vaccine. They had these sort of rudimentary vaccines back then. So the point is this, right? We know that these people are usually trafficked in very unhealthy conditions, but here we're being told that they're healthy. But we also know that they're being treated like livestock. They're chattel. They're not being treated like people. We know they're going to land somewhere in the Carolinas and then maybe Georgia because of the ties that Lawrence has to Georgia. What kind of work do you think they're going to be doing there? Considering where they're going and where they came from, you should be able to answer that question. So when we look at this, we can kind of get a glimpse into these people's lives. Of course, we have many more questions, but the beauty of this is that it can take you to many and more answers. You know, what was it like for these people coming over? By the way, you know, were they tight packed or were they loose packed? It's hard to say. There's 250 of them, right? And sold. Do all slaves? Well, no. So we don't really know how many slaves were on board this ship to begin with. We know apparently 250, which is a really odd number, right? You know, maybe all of them made it. I don't know, but that's a question. So were they tight packed? How big is this ship? The Bunce Island or Bance Island? How big is it? I don't know, but we could probably find out if we did more research. If we found out how big it is, and then we saw, okay, 250 of these people were held in bondage, then we would know probably whether they were tight packed or loose packed. So not only does this give us answers as to what people were, you know, had to deal with back then or what they were living, their lives were like, but also raises questions and actually raises new forms or new threads or paths of inquiry. This is how historians do history. Primary sources are at the heart of historical inquiry. And not everybody's going to agree on what primary sources mean. You know, I can look at a primary source and my colleague can look at the same primary source and we come up with different things. Very often a lot of similar stuff, very often helping each other out, but we don't always agree on what it means. This is the beauty of history. History is not just dates, it's not just facts, it's an interpretation of those primary sources that we have to deal with. Now, I hope you will take the time to engage in the discussion board exercise that I gave you. These are ads for runaway slaves. What do these ads tell us about the time and place, about the lives of the people who are sort of depicted in these ads? So I hope this gives you a little bit of an understanding. You know, this is really just kind of a quick and dirty kind of thing on primary sources. You should, of course, read the background stuff that I posted and consider the things that I've told you and how you might look at a primary source in ways that maybe someone else can't. You have to have a little bit of knowledge, but you also have to have a lot of curiosity. Ask questions of the source, okay? And don't always think that your answer is the end all and be all of it. Really, you're going to have more questions than answers, probably. Although some things can be quite clear. For example, smallpox was a thing at this time. We know that's clear. So slaves were sold and advertisements were held out for people to see them. We know that. That's quite clear. But then, of course, there's a lot of questions here. What were the lives of these people like? Because they're slaves, they didn't leave, and because they were this kind of slave, right? Somebody coming off of a boat, they probably didn't leave much for us to study. Very few slaves have left behind personal accounts, though there are some really rich accounts. We don't have nearly as many as we would like. because the people who owned these people, quote unquote, owned them, did not really care about their experience beyond the fact that they were property. Yes, we know names, we know ages, we know quantities, but that's kind of like just the way you would keep track of other property. So keep these things in the back of your mind as you move forward through the course, and hopefully this will come in handy when you go to do the discussion board for this module. I'm going to end it there and say thanks for listening. Be well and be good. Take care.